Or no, I see your movement.
No, your picture froze. I missed part of that.
Okay, what part did you miss?
It was brief. It was only about 5 seconds.
Okay. I I notice movement. I notice subtleties. I notice energy. And I always have, but I didn't know that. And so part of my journey, I'll say, especially with last year's trip into the mental institution that I oftentimes reference because of how traumatic that was, because of how horrifying it was to be a privileged white girl from a good family that has high standards for how to live, even though we don't necessarily have a religious foundation. I never thought that my freedoms could be taken away the way that they were and the way that I see it playing out culturally now. But I'm grateful for that experience because it came after doing 8 DMT ceremonies, dimethyltryptamine, which was with a shaman. So I did try to get support. It was just when you don't know how to integrate energies after the fact and you don't understand what's already inside, it's very difficult to create a harmonic space. And when we use those external substances or just the external triggers, like even exercise can be something we're addicted to because of the serotonin rush we get. And cortisol is connected with the stress hormone that we're driven by because we're more inclined oftentimes to move away from pain than we are driven by pleasure, of which is our natural state. When we actually tune in, peace is what we find. But when we're trying to add, we don't experience our own nature or understand it. And then the things that we notice that other people might not, we then think we're strange or weird, or it was nothing. I shouldn't have said anything. And then we belittle ourselves for going down a rabbit hole that was true, that did actually have a cue that I was aware of, even though it wasn't spoken. And these are the things that we're coming together to talk about, because if we won't talk about the things that are not acceptable in the tribe that we had to conform in order to belong to, how ever will we be able to become all of who and whose we truly are?
I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with a gentleman who, in the last couple of years, had noticed there were times when he saw blue lights flashing around him that other people couldn't see. And of course, he had that same thought about, is this real? Can I talk about this? What will people think? But he had started to notice a pattern that they seemed to be an indicator of a truth and would show up at the most interesting moments when a truth had been spoken, or when he was about to make a decision to go left, go right, what was the course of action, and when he took the proper course of action, he would see these blue lights flashing. And I said to him, the universe will show you many signs. I used to get mine from license plates on cars, and it would be speaking in a language that seemed only I could read, but it was always 100% accurate, and I knew how to count on it as a guidepost along the way. And I suggested to him that if he would do the same thing, if he would just trust his inner guidance system and use it that way, he would benefit powerfully. And just to hear me say that to him was transformative. Somebody didn't think he was crazy, and somebody actually spoke about it in a very meaningful way. So seeing energy, yeah, it's amazing what people see or feel or sense, and often don't have a reference or a context for it, and then feel like they can't speak about it. So
If you're in the mental institution, you literally, that is a box that gets checked for you to get a diagnosis and then be wrecked by the medication that gets imposed on one who is not sane enough to decide for themselves what they need. Well, physician, heal thine own self. We are the medicine men and women of the past who lost the title of native healers simply because profits became more important than people. We have a chemical pharmacy inside of us, each of us. We already are the most intricate machine there has ever been designed, other than all the rest of the animals, of which are all very well put together and beautiful and amazing too. Except we have consciousness to be able to perceive our environment and all of these energies and then be able to make stories about them. And even those stories then become the belief system that we base our life on. And whether that belief system is serving us or not generally shows up in our feelings and how we are able to be in this world.
And this is the profound difference between human consciousness and ascended master consciousness, because the human consciousness is always limited by the cultural paradigm, which is microscopic compared to the full consciousness that the masters have access to, and that we have access to once we learn how to reconnect with our inner divine self.
So how do you do that for somebody that is completely new to all of this?
Well, you have to have the patience to begin the process. The longest journey begins with a single step, and there has to be an understanding that it's going to take time. You're not going to get there today or tomorrow, but you're going to move toward it. And consciousness is progressively unfolding without limit, so that where I exist today is far beyond where I thought was possible 20 years ago, and 40 and 50 years ago. And when I was involved with LSD and substances, I thought I was experiencing the type of consciousness that was not available by any other means. And today I've come to understand that I've gone farther than even those visions would take me. So it's progressive, and it's just enjoy the journey. Just start moving towards it. Just start really seeking authentic presence, seeking good mentors. I have always looked for the best of the best in mentors in every field. When I studied science, when I studied biochemistry, when I studied business, success coaches in life, I always wanted to know who's got the fruit on the tree, who's really harvesting properly, who's the best of the best. And I put my own personal education as being much more important to acquisition of things. I would watch people spend money on a lottery ticket. I would go buy a book. I would see people spending money on something for a vacation. I would take a course. So I continued to work on myself and build myself and grow myself so that I could have what I was really looking for, which is the level of consciousness that was not available by being immersed in distractions, being immersed in entertainment, being immersed in avoidance, and all the things that people get stuck into because that's what everybody around them is doing. So the Ascended Master Saint Germain has a phrase that I like to repeat: come apart now and be a separate and chosen people. You have to really choose authentic presence. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the mire of that world out there. You can exist in that world. I often say, I don't live in that world. I just interface with it. But where I live internally in consciousness is somewhere far outside that world. Because most of it is nonsense and all of it is illusion. So you had a question as to how. You have to find a spiritual teacher that you trust. You have to begin spiritual exercises. I remember for me in the 1970s, I found the book Autobiography of a Yogi, and that really was helpful in pointing me in a direction. I had initially learned yogic breathing from a gentleman who was in a Rosicrucian tradition. I had studied esoteric Buddhism, so I was very much um, practicing particular meditations. And for a time, it will not matter what path you're choosing, as long as you're choosing a path that requires discipline, that begins to structure your thinking and begins to require of you the discipline of your energies so that you actually dedicate time to it on a regular basis and make it part of your daily life. And there will be an inner attunement that starts to occur naturally through that. Your guides and guardians and guardian angels and all those energies that assist you will lead you to who is your next proper teacher. And eventually you will come to find the ascended masters who are the true teachers. And you will discover that all those paths lead to the one path, the path of ascension, whereby you can walk the path of initiation, where the masters will train you, they will initiate you, and they will guide you to the ascension portal, where you can make your ascension at the close of this embodiment. Or if you haven't balanced sufficient karma, you will probably be able to make your ascension at the close of the next embodiment, and you will get on to becoming an immortal ascended being and fulfill your destiny. But start somewhere. Start with truth. Start with good teachers. Start with a spiritual practice, and allow yourself to be guided until you're ready. Many people come to speak to me, and they're not ready for this teaching. They're not ready for the Ascended Masters. They're not ready to surrender many of the human behaviors. They're not ready to submit to the disciplines and the obedience that's required. You have to be obedient to the truth, to the light within. And it will require many things become discarded, recognized as not useful, recognized as harmful, and discarded. And many people are not willing to do that with their ego, with their ideas, with their thoughts and positions about things. Well, I shouldn't have to do. Well, okay, you don't think you should have to, then go back into where you've been. That's what happens.
And Don Miguel Ruiz, when I interjected before you carried on with very important wisdom to just approach the journey one step at a time and continue to move forward, is Don Miguel Ruiz from the Four Agreements, a
Yes.
wisdom guide. He talks about the mitote as being the grand illusion and dream that we're all caught up in thinking is real, just like the Matrix. And ultimately, of the Four Agreements, the very first is be impeccable with your word, which means to be without sin. And the notion of sin, which so many who do choose an external substance and feel weak for it, or who choose something outside of themselves that can stimulate the chemical concoction within us that we're addicted to, like exercise or shopping, sex, or any kind of instant gratification, even just food, which how do you stop eating food if that's what you're addicted to? You treat the roots. You actually get back to the fact that sin is to be without grievance towards yourself, to be good to yourself, to stay in tune with the authentic presence that you had mentioned, which is when we are fully present rather than veiled over top of the truth, which we do to ourselves. How often and why? And it's like, wow, sometimes as I alter my own state, it's just like I am a really good player of life that sometimes feels the need to make things more difficult just for the contrast. Really? That's sometimes the thought that goes in my mind as I succumb to my own human needs or desires and wants. And so through that process, why I share this so candidly, and Michael, thank you for doing this too. Ultimately, why we do this is for you to know that all of us who are here are just doing our best one step at a time. That's how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. How you climb a mountain, one step at a time. How you do anything is you just take the next step. When you realize that you stepped on something that is not going to be able to support you, you have the opportunity to step backwards. Understanding we do live in a universe of cause and effect. And so if we can get back to the root cause of the desire to escape the moment and being fully present with the power we have in it, then we can really make change and also stand before you as imperfectly perfect beings too, not needing to be anything other than just who and whose we all are, and to get back to the truth of who we are as individuals within that macrocosm that we're all part of.
There is an aspect of inner work that is very easily avoided, and it has to do with your inner child. And when we talk about the soul, the masters describe that as the inner child. And much of what goes on in psychology of people that are not as well as they would like to be is because they're not nurturing their inner child. And it takes work. And I know I have friends who I observe in what I see as distressful conditions that they choose not to acknowledge. They will not speak about it. They have their own definitions of success, and they keep themselves so busy that there is no opportunity to have conversation about this or to even think about this, and that inner child work never gets done. And the conditions that are observed by those who love them never get discussed. And we just have to sit back and watch that individual go through the pain that they're going through. Most people don't want to do that kind of work. The inner child work is very powerful. And there is a child within all of us that really requires nurturing because it has been wounded from the first slap on the bum when it came out of mommy's womb, and all the torment of life and what happened during pregnancy. What was that fetus experiencing? Were mommy and daddy fighting? Was there violence, anger in the environment? All those vibrations impacting the soul coming in its most delicate state have a profound influence on the individual later in life.
It's the cultural trauma that all of us have been literally bred in the womb of, because all of us come from traumatized people for the most part, even if it's just the perception of trauma from someone that experienced something and felt hurt by it, that gets internalized if not dealt with. And I absolutely love that you spoke of the soul as the inner child, because truly, literally, yesterday I went to lunch with a friend, and when he told me something, I clapped and gleed and did the things that I normally do, and I realized how childlike I am in terms of how the joy just overflows, and then I do things that may seem weird or off the wall to a lot of people just because I am just delighting and exciting in what life is offering, because I've been on this spiritual path for 10 years, devoted and not perfect by any means, but just really doing my best to be nicer to the inner child, and I always said children within, because it's each of those moments in our history where we have taken on someone else's judgment and then auto-domesticated ourselves, which Don Miguel Ruiz also talks about. and the Four Agreements that I think is a must read book. And it's like we have taken out so much of the inner kingdom and the rooms within it that we think that we're just this broken down bungalow that needs a lot of TLC.